Hello and welcome back to my workshop for another of Harry's Jeti videos. This one is a variation on the automatic switching for things like flick rolls and spins to a very high rate and then back to a low rate, based purely on moving the sticks to save you actually having to move a physical switch to switch it on and off. The question was asked on a forum, could a chap have a version where above 80% elevator would switch to a high rate flight mode, but it wouldn't switch off the high rate flight mode until the rudder alone moved below 20%. So it doesn't matter what you do with elevator, but the rudder's got to come back below 20 to switch it off. And the question is a bit inconsistent because it then asked for elevator and rudder to switch on this high rate flight mode, but still just rudder below 20 switching it off. But it's easy to accommodate either of them, so we'll very quickly show how to do both. And the answer to this one is actually given in the question, if you know your Jeti logic switches. What you're wanting is condition A to switch it on, but condition B to switch it off. And in one of the version 5 software updates, which at the time of making this video is less than a year ago, Jeti put in a new switch called the A on, B off, which, there you go, the question gave you the answer, but you have to know your Jeti logic switches. And the A on, B off switch is a very, very useful one. I'm starting to use it more and more. So let's look at how you'd program this. So here's our little flight modes. I've created a second little flight mode called flight mode A, which we'll assume is your very high rate mode. So the switch will be logic switch 1. Say OK to that. And let's go and set up the logic switches. You come in here, enable that, come down further, and the switch we're going to use is this one here. A switches it on, B switches it off. So there is A, control 1, B, control 2. Gets a bit confusing in their menus. Why don't they just have control 1 and control 2? Why have A, control 1, B, control 2? Anyway, it doesn't matter. Off we go. Oops. Right, come up to control 1. Now the first one in the post asked for just elevator. Okay, so let's do elevator alone, switches this on. We'll move the elevator stick. We don't want this because this is a very simple switching one. We want that one there. However, if you just wanted up elevator to trigger it, you could choose this menu here, pull sort of elevator you want, press that button to set the switching point, and it's set it at -83. You can then use the rotary dial to adjust the exact figure that you want, so you can put it wherever you like. But we don't want that one because we'll assume that you want this to switch on at 80% up or 80% down elevator, and this only allows you one switch point. So we come back to this menu, say OK, because what that does is open up this field here, which doesn't exist if you choose the other two types of switching menus. And we come along here, we can choose X is greater than, linear. Now, this is what we're after. X between the two bars is less than, or X between the two bars is greater than, and then a number. And what the two bars means is whatever number you put in here, it will apply both the plus and the minus values to it. So if we choose 80% here, it'll trigger at -80% and +80%. In other words, full up and full down elevator. And the little symbol there, greater than, or we choose the other one, less than, means if you're inside, the number's chosen, or greater than, if you're outside, the number's chosen, it'll switch on. So we want elevator to switch this on when it goes beyond 80%, which is outside. So X is greater than either of those bars. Lovely. Come along here, set 80%. And that's it. It will now trigger at 80% up or down elevator. Now we'll use the rudder to switch this off. So we go in there, move the rudder. Once again, we want that screen because that opens up this field here. We come along and we'll say that X has got to be between the two bars. We'll set 20 in here, but this time less than. So when the rudder stick moves inside of 20% either way, it'll switch on. Now, it's important to understand that the rudder stick being inside 20% either way is not enough to switch this off. It actually has to make the transition into that zone. So we can use elevator, if I pull up elevator, to switch it on. There it goes, it's switched on. Now the rudder is sitting at 0, so it's inside the 20% either way band, but it hasn't switched it off. It has to actually make the transition. So if I move the rudder way out, now watch as the rudder reduces. When it gets to the 20% band, it'll switch off. There. And now, watch our flight modes. I pull elevator around. Not a lot happens until I get to 80% elevator one way. It goes to flight mode A. Elevator's back at neutral. But the rudder has to come back to within 20% to switch it back to the default mode. So there you go. I'll pull full elevator and rudder, assuming I'm doing something like a flick or a spin. Watch P2. I will let the elevator come back to neutral, but we're still in the spin mode. Rudder's reducing, rudder's reducing, rudder's reducing. Only when I get down to 20% rudder will it switch back to default. And there you go. So that's the first version answered. What about if you want the switch on not to be just elevator, but both rudder and elevator at 80%? No problem. You just create another logic switch. And come down, control 1, the elevator, proportional to that screen, yes. X is outside of 80%. And control 2 will be, of course, the rudder. Change screen, say OK. Again, X is outside 80%. The condition will be and. So both elevator and rudder have to go beyond 80% and it'll switch on. So elevator alone can't switch it on. Rudder alone can't switch it on. Both of them above 80% switches on. As soon as one of them alone comes back below 80, it switches off. Okie doke. Now, go back to our original logic switch, and instead of using control P2 alone to switch it on, we'll change that, clear it out, logic switch that we've just created, that one. And we'll need to move to that screen, because if we remain in this one, it's going to offer us again all those, less thans, equals, insides, outsides. We don't want those offers. We just want straightforward. Watch that. Both sticks together, switches on. Both sticks switches off. Say OK. See that little menu's disappeared from that line. And now the switch is off. We're in default flight mode. Move the elevator alone, does nothing. Move the rudder alone, does nothing. But once both elevator and rudder go above 80%, switch is on. Flight mode A, the spin mode is on. I'll release the elevator. It doesn't matter that A, control 1's gone back to 0. I'm still holding on full rudder. And as I gently move the rudder back, it's got to get all the way down to 20%. Then that'll switch off and we'll go back to default. And there we go. So, problem solved.